In part 2 of our interview, Mark Gregston shares profound lessons from failure and forgiveness. Reflecting on being fired, Mark explains how setbacks often lead to greater opportunities when viewed through faith. He also delves into overcoming bitterness and the transformative power of forgiveness, emphasizing that it's not about excusing others, but freeing ourselves. Mark highlights the impact of words, the importance of vulnerability in parenting, and finding purpose in struggles, reminding us that God uses challenges to shape and guide us.
I'd like to circle back to when you lost your job.
Yeah.
Because that was probably a significant failure in your life. And I think for a lot of people, they fail, then they quit, and then they believe they're a failure. When we know, you said, half the stuff you try doesn't work out, because failing is really experience. Failing is learning. It's when you quit trying, that it becomes a failure. Talk to us about the most important lesson you learned from that.
Every year the staff here at Heartlight, we're in Texas, we have a celebration on August 4th, and it's the day that I got fired in Branson, Missouri. And so this will be our 37th year. And they do that because they're glad to be a part. We have 50 staff, and they're glad to be a part. They wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have relationships. We wouldn't be impacting people had that not happened. Now, I know that in retrospect, and it took me a long time to get there. And how I wish somebody would have sat with me during those times. It was interesting to me that when I got fired, most people, were pretty negative on everything I wanted to do. And instead of thinking that, maybe God just gave that man the greatest action in his life. And I realize that too when I have to let people go, that when I have to let people go, because I have those feelings that it's not working out, it's not going well, that maybe God's nudging me to say, get this person free so they can move on and accomplish what he wants. Yep. And I think when you begin to realize that it's God moving. I mean, if everything comes to us as first passed through the hands of God, then my firing that I had, that I held bitterly against the man who fired me for 12 years till I sat down with him, was really God firing me. I mean, it was really him saying, it's time to move on. You need to do something different. And it's true. Now, the problem is the timing of that. It doesn't always coincide. You don't say that the minute you get fired. I was depressed. I had a tough time. I felt a sense of rejection. Everybody was saying, you can't do these things you're talking about. You'll never be able to do this. This isn't you. I mean, everything was negative. And I just sat there and I thought, it made me feel even more rejected from the comments that people made to me. And one man, a guy named Spike White, he was 84 years old at the time. And so he'd be 100 million years old now. But he came to me and goes, Mark, the greatest thing just happened in your life. And I think that perspective makes me look at things differently. Whatever comes to us is first passed through the hands of God. So there's something for me to learn. There's something for me to embrace and go, what can I learn from this? Any kid that comes into our life, we have 60 of them that live with us now. God has brought them here to get help, but he's also brought them here to teach me a lesson about how to reach a different style of kid, how to reach a different group of parents, how to engage differently and give them what they need so that we can change the destiny, or not us change the destiny. We create the atmosphere for God to change the destiny of their family.
Can you talk a little bit about, it sounds like you were struggling for 12 years with bitterness and unforgiveness. Is that accurate, what I heard?
Oh, purely.
It's interesting. Our theme this year at our camp was Your Story Isn't Over. And the second night, we talked about just letting it go and how so many of us are trapped, in this unforgiveness, feeling like that we're going to exonerate this other person. if we forgive them, when really we're the ones being held captive. And I'll never forget that night when everybody bowed their head. There was 80% of the men that raised their hand that night that was dealing with that. And it was
Yeah.
just, it was amazing to me, statistically, how many there were. Walk us through
Yeah.
maybe how you finally overcame that. You said you sat down and you met with the man. And then maybe just a little bit about what some of those struggles were, because it's like you made a comment a while ago, in the moment is difficult. I think God asks us to do things that we know what his word says
Mm-hmm.
logically, not emotionally. I can make a decision to do something and not feel like I
Yeah.
need to be doing it. Just like
Yeah.
I'm an American today. I'm going to feel a whole lot more patriotic when I'm at the next football game and they're singing the national anthem, but it doesn't change the fact of how I feel.
Yeah.
you know, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think it's the merging of both those worlds. I mean, for me, I think what I've seen is that people try to have a real life, and somebody else has a spiritual life. And quite honestly, God inhabits us all the time. I mean, everything we do is spiritual. Everything. I mean, it's anything. I mean, you just look at it, and when we don't, it's usually sin. And so for me, there was a part. I remember the day there was a lady that made a comment to me. Um, I was leading a parenting seminar. So here I'm telling people they need to forgive people. You need to deal with your bitterness, telling them all the right ways to do things. And I was sitting there going, inside, there was still a part of me that was remembering the day that I got fired and rejected by a best friend, and had to move from a town that I thought I'd spend the rest of my life in. And I mean, I was just undone. And she made this comment at a parenting deal. She came up to me. She goes, Mark, I've realized that forgiveness is giving up hope that you'll ever have a better past. And I
Oh,
kept thinking about that. And I go, God, you got to be, where did that come from? And I mean, that lady taught me something. And so I was at an event. I don't know whether it was I don't know what kind of youth seminar or counseling seminar or something, but we had a booth, and we were, engaging people with us. And I heard this laugh, and it was over on the other side of the exhibit hall, and it was the guy who fired me. So I went up to him
mm.
and I said, hey, can we get together for lunch and just sit down? And so even when we sat down, he goes, I've heard you say some bad things about me. No, I've never said anything bad about you. I just spoke the truth to people who ask the questions. And he never got it. He never got it.
Mm,
Probably a month and a half before he died, he wrote me a note and he said, I just want you to know how proud of you I am.
mm,
You know, could I have accelerated that? I don't know. I mean, I believe in God's timing. I believe in his timing, the way we grieve, maybe the way we celebrate. But I think also the processing that God wanted me to learn some things that could not have been learned um, any other way. And he taught me a lot through all of that, because it was all about rejection, which I would go back to my dad and think that I felt that from him all the time. It was about not feeling valued. So you find out where your real value is. It's not popularity. It's not being some rock
mm.
star. All those things. You begin to realize those are nothing. Now I tell kids all the time, hey, I don't owe you anything, but I want to give you everything. And what you're doing is keeping that from happening. And so let me give you some things that I think are important in life. And I think you begin to realize that by the actions that have happened in your life. We lost our home in a tornado um, right when I was 19. Matter of fact, it was probably 3 months before I was asked to do the Young Life thing. And when you lose everything in life, it's amazing how you don't hold on to possessions later in life. Um, any situation I've been in, I've really thought God is trying to teach me something, and if you don't begin to learn the lessons, then you replace it or hold on to the bitterness and the non-forgiveness, rather than looking at it, this could be the most positive thing in your life. As hard as it is, it could be the most positive.
Yeah, that's so good. I think so many guys probably listening today, would have dealt with being fired the same way you did, because our identity, if we're not really rooted in that we're a son,
Yeah,
our identity is rooted in what we do, and that's
yeah,
where we draw our affirmation and
yeah,
our value from. And when that's taken away, it's like our whole identity is attacked.
yeah.
And that it makes you really vulnerable, for the enemy. And it's pretty cool to see how you, probably the amount of time that it took you to process through that, you learned so much over a longer period of time that you could digest it to really be able to speak that into the lives of so many other guys. So,
Yeah, and quite honestly, it's, I don't feel any different than when I was 21 years old. But I've realized I've learned some stuff. Um, I've learned some stuff that other people haven't learned yet. And so that means I'm going to share what I've learned. And because I have gray hair and because I cough all the time or have a new kidney or any of those things, I realize I'm older, and you learn some things. And how I wish I would have had an older person in my life sharing with me, their struggles and difficulties and hardships. So I think kids are the same way. I think kids want to hear that from their parents. And when a dad realizes, okay, this is a bad thing, when we look at it, we're seeing it as a bad thing, but it's really a good thing. When you have that breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend, or when you get kicked off a team, or you do something stupid and have consequences for it, or you get a $500, speeding ticket for, being an idiot and running through a school zone at 90 miles an hour. I mean, those are things for you to learn, to learn something from. And I think that's where God places those things, or takes advantage of those things, to teach us the lessons that we need to learn. It's helping kids feel comfortable in the atmosphere of somebody's home, or the environment that you have. So they feel like they can look at stuff and begin to say, you know, there's a lesson here, just like dad always said there's a lesson. But the only way to do that is for dad to be sharing, to be vulnerable, to be genuine, to be authentic, to deal with their own bitterness sometimes. I'm still bitter. I'm still bitter. I'm still mad. This comment was, I had a guy come up to me and said, a lady made a comment to me, a teacher, when I was in the third grade. She said, if you had as much brains as you did fat, you may make something of yourself. And he said, I'm 45 years old, and I still think about that every day. Okay. When scripture says that the Spirit of God is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, goodness, and self-control, it means that God does not desire for you to be controlled by a comment that somebody made when you were in the third grade.
yeah.
My wife was not made to be controlled by a grandfather that sexually abused her for 7 years. She was made for something greater than that. And when we let that continue to control us, even though she's had to work through all that stuff for, decades, you begin to realize that we're controlled by a lot of stuff that God's trying to get us out of to bring us to a better place. And you don't do that unless you sit down and start thinking about stuff. Somebody came to me and said, you need to write a book. And I go, I don't even read books. And they said, no, you need to. You're 50 years old. You need to reflect on some stuff that's happened in your life and deal with it. So he kind of walked me along. He said, I want you to write a story to me about a dad that's struggling with his daughter because I'm going through a divorce and my daughter hates me. And so I just sat down and I thought, man, I don't even know what to say. And then you start thinking differently. Now, I don't know whether it's another plane or it's stopping long enough to reflect on something. And I started to write and I thought, wow. And he wrote, and he says, now you're tapping into something you've never tapped into before. And I think that you get to an age where we get the idea that everything's going to remain the same, but God is doing things to teach you some things so you can teach others. And when you stop and reflect on those things, most people wait until they're 75 or 80 years old. You can do that, a lot earlier in life and realize what you've learned and then share that with your kids. That's the kind of wisdom they're looking for. They're just not looking for rules and consequences. And, if you do this, then I'll do this, that they are looking for a genuine, authentic, vulnerable person. They're never going to find that on the internet, and they're never going to find that anywhere else, usually unless it's a mom or dad or grandparents that are involved in their life.
Yeah, I want to circle back to something you said a while ago about the teacher that made the comments to the boys, 45 years old. The Bible talks about death and life are in the power of the tongue, and how responsible as parents we need to be on what we say, especially when we're angry or maybe we're hurt or we feel disrespected, and how those words can echo, through future generations. I had a guy at my camp this year. He was actually in my group. Our camps broke down into 10 guys per campsite. He was 68 years old, and God just rocked his world that whole weekend. And I was in the tent changing the last morning, and I overheard him sharing this with another guy. He said, this is the first time in 35 years that I've woke up and I've not heard my dad's voice telling me what a worthless piece of crap I am.
Yeah.
And he's been dead for a decade.
Wow.
And he had packed that for almost 4 decades, and just give it to God the night before, and released his dad. And when he let go of the unforgiveness, he was free from all of that.
Yeah.
But that shows us the power of our words. And I think in reverse, we've all said things we wish we hadn't have said and that we could take back. Yeah. But just like it can bring death, it can also bring life. And going and just speaking life back into people, hey, and forgiveness sometimes is that life. I blew it. I can't, I can't make that. I can't get that time back, but I would sure like a second chance. Would you forgive me? Yeah. I'm proud of you, son. I love you. All of those things are just ways to, speak life, back into people.
Yeah. There was a TV program a few years ago called Earl, and Earl, got struck by a bolt of lightning, and he was just a country bumpkin, living out in the woods, kind of this old redneck fella that spoke with a Southern twang, and he gets struck by lightning or has a car accident or something. But he comes to the realization that there's more to life than what he's expected. But he also realizes he's offended people and done things to people throughout his life that he needs to make amends. And so each, of the 90 episodes they had of this was him going to people comically, and asking for their forgiveness. So how he got to them was funny, but there was always a moment, just a moment that he asked for forgiveness in so many different ways. And, I would sit there and think, who have I offended? I'm looking for a guy named Robert Stewart. I beat him up in the 4th grade. I broke his nose. I'm still looking for the guy. I would love to say, hey, because I don't want him thinking, I remember that Mark Gregston guy 60 years ago that he told me I was a worthless piece of crap, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be that person. A man I was speaking at some deal up in Kansas City, and this guy came up to me and I recognized him. And he said, I just need to apologize that I kind of shunned you and cut you out of our life when you asked us to move out of your rent house. We moved, and I told this couple, you can stay in the house. We're not going to sell it. Then somebody came to us and wanted to buy it. And so I had to ask him and his new wife to leave. And he said, I've held that against you for 40 years.
Wow.
And I go, well, brother, I don't even remember that, even though I did. I go, I'm so sorry we lost that time. I hope we can spend some time together. And, we carry things. I don't know why we carry all that baggage sometimes. And sometimes we don't let go of it because we don't have something to grab a hold of. And if we have something that we go, God's trying to teach us something. He wants something better for us. And he's been involved in all this. even if I don't understand it, then there's a whole new realm, there's a whole new world to move into. You are not the same person that you have to be when you were in high school. There's a book written, Is There Life After High School? There's another book that was written about, how you can determine how people are going to be in the third grade. And I go, how miserable is that? It was interesting that the guy, there was a group called the Monkees years ago, the guy named Michael Nesmith. And the Monkees kind of broke up and their TV show went off, and they were at the height in the 60s and early 70s, the height of their career. Anyway, everything was good. And he's now 27. And somebody came to him and said, wasn't that just devastating and ended life for you? And his comment was unbelievable. He said, I'm not going to let anything anything that's said in life or done in life determine who I am for the rest of my life. And I sat there and I thought, that's a smart man. I wanted to ask him, well, how long did it take you to get to that?
Yeah.
And how I wish somebody would have said that for me not to hold on to all those things. I swam competitively for 13 years. My dad never came to any of our meets. I mean, ever. Said he wanted to charge me rent at 13. All these things. And you just kind of go, those stick with you. And probably why I wanted to get away from, probably why I got married so early, because I ended up marrying somebody that was just as needy as I was. And so it was like, as in East Texas terms, it's like two ticks sucking off each other, kind of coming together. And, but that's probably why. I mean, and so I sure have realized at that point that words that are said stick with you. So it makes me very careful about the words that I say to kids who are struggling, who have made mistakes, who are making poor choices, who look at me and flip me off and roll their eyes and tell me to go F myself or whatever it is. I go, you know what? I got to be careful with those words because they can stick with these kids. Yeah. So it's, how do I love them differently? That becomes the key.
I was going to skip over this, but I'm going to go back because you brought it up twice now. What was the greatest lesson that your parents ever taught you? And it could have been all this stuff not to do, but now I'm curious. I have to know. I heard some of these comments about your dad.
My brother and I were estranged for a while. He's an atheist, but we were just estranged. I mean, he went off on his own life and married a few times, and we just now, he even came to my granddaughter's wedding a couple of days ago, and we have a great relationship. And I asked him the same question. I said, what did you learn from Dad that you can pass on? He goes, I learned how to do everything differently. Mm. And I thought, instead of being critical, I think that's a great statement of saying, then what did I learn from that? If everything's passed through the hands of God, I was always angry at my dad. And I had this dream one night that it was as vivid as anything because it was in color, and which surprised me. Only time I remember something in color. And I dreamed that I died and I went to heaven. And I'm walking through these pearly gates as I see it. There's God standing there, in the face of Jesus, because that's the only physical thing I have to in my mind to think of what he's going to look like. He's standing there, and my dad is standing right next to him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so my first words to God when I got to heaven were, what's that son of a doing there? And he looked at me and he said, Mark, I want to tell you something. I've been using this man in your life for the last 57 years to transform you into the person that I want you to be. Mm-hmm. I woke up. I was no longer angry at my dad. I was whatever. And so when that lady said, forgiveness is giving up hope that you'll ever have a better past. It's also learning that God has been involved in our lives a lot more than we know, and has been pushing us and encouraging us to lead a life that's worthy of Him and worthy of those people around us as well.
So I'd like to ask every guest on the show this one question. What does it mean to you to man up?
I think it's interesting. It's not having, a six pack on your belly. It's not making sure that I'm working out all the time. I spent a week and a half in intensive care, and it's amazing to me how quickly your body deteriorates when you're laying there. It's just, I lost so much weight, it was unbelievable. So any muscles I had or anything else, I thought, golly, if I would have spent all these years trying to man up and bow up and be some stud strong like bull, then it's all gone. It's all gone in no time at all. Nobody's ever come to me and said, man, I heard you were an all-American swimmer. Oh, I heard that you were, that you ride horses. I heard that you used to break horses. Nobody says that. I haven't read that in one obituary of anybody, but it's how you treated people. It's how you stood for the principles that you believe in. So, your teens will force you to embrace the principles and help you determine what you believe in. They will. They'll push you to that point. I think it's loving your wife in those very special ways that make her fulfilled. That's manning up. It's standing up. And if you've gone through a divorce, it is not letting the pettiness of life and relationships that have gone awry control so that you're using your child as a pawn. It's manning up. It's stepping up to things. I'm going to love somebody regardless. And I know a kid that just died a year ago that was gay, and yeah, I knew there was something different about him when he lived with us. He lived with us for 2 years, and his dad didn't want him to be gay. And I go, well, but he's still your son. Well, anyway, he died a year ago. He was 53 years old. Died a year ago. Nobody came to see him at the hospital. Nobody, they wouldn't they didn't have a funeral. They were embarrassed by everything. And my comment is that dad should have manned up. It's being a real man, it's not the physical stuff. It's not wearing a cowboy hat, making sure you have boots on, and all that stuff is just wood, hay, and stubble. It is being who God's created you to be. And I think you can read through Scripture. It's meek, gentle, mild, engaging, loving, all those things. To love them in a way, love people around you in a way that they get a taste of the character of God when they're with you, and that becomes important.
Yeah, which is really the example that Jesus gave us.
Yeah.
When he was walking. Last question today. How do you want to be remembered when your life is over here on the earth? Like, what kind of mark do you want to leave that can't be erased?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd probably want somebody to say, Grandpa was fun. Dad was fun. The people around me, well, he was a fun guy to be with. That's it. I strive to love people from any background, anywhere, the best I can. And I don't care who it is. I don't care what they're doing. So I'm always trying to create a better environment for anybody. And that's what I would hope, is that they would just say he was a fun guy.
Mark, thanks for joining us today. It's
absolutely.
It's been a joy to hear your story, to hear your struggles, where you've came from, and all the things, and how God's using you today. It's pretty amazing. Can you tell the audience where they can find out some more information? You're on radio, you have a podcast. I know you've authored several books. Plug those real quick. Those are resources that these guys could really utilize.
Yeah. Resources for parents. Would be parentingtodaysteens.org. That's the podcast, broadcast, books, and seminars and conferences, family and crisis conferences, stuff like that. And then if they want to find out about Heartlight, our residential counseling center, just go to heartlightministries.org, or look up Mark Gregston. just get online, Google it, and you'll find out about us somewhere. Read all the positive stuff, not the negative stuff.
Chew up the meat, spit out the bones. I love it.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, remember, legacy is not so much what we leave to people. It's really more about what we leave in them. We'll see you next time on the Man Up Podcast.
Thank you for watching the Man Up Podcast. Make sure to follow on Spotify and subscribe on YouTube. And give us a review in the comment section on YouTube.
Thank you for listening to the Man Up Podcast. For more resources on your journey to becoming a better man, check out manupadventure.com. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up to receive our weekly Man Up newsletter for encouragement and tips every Monday. If you haven't attended Man Up Adventure Camp yet, it's not too late. Register now for camp in 2025. We hope to see you around the fire.